When it comes to technological failures, it seems most simply fall into obscurity. From the Apple Newton to the BlackBerry Playbook, sure they got bad press for a time, but after a few years nobody even remembers them, for better or worse. Except for one tech product, one that just can't seem to get a rest. One still being made fun of nearly 20 years after its introduction, Clippy. Yes, who could forget the much maligned addition to Microsoft Office 97? A little cartoon paperclip intent on making the user experience just a bit easier with a more human touch. Pretty cheesy, especially for an addition to a business application. So, where did this idea come from, and where did it go? Our story begins a few decades ago. In the year 1991, the proportion of families in the United States who owned a computer was somewhere around 15%. Yet between the constantly dropping prices of personal computers and a niche little thing called the internet becoming more and more popular with each passing year, it was obvious that that statistic was only going to grow. Some forecasts suggested that almost half of all households would own a computer by 1995, and with computers making their way into the home, a whole new demographic of less technically inclined people would be using them. It's worth noting that the graphical user interface, popularized by the Macintosh in 1984, had been introduced less than a decade ago, and it was still up for debate if the desktop window metaphor would continue to be used or if it was just a fad. The workers on the Microsoft project Utopia, started in 1992, believed in the latter to some extent. Just as the graphical interface had extended the text interface, a social interface, they suggested, would extend the graphical interface. Armed with research from Stanford suggesting that people interact socially with computers as if they were humans, along with the two professors behind the research, Clifford Nass and Byron Reeves as consultants, Microsoft spent the next 3 years creating what some would consider to be its biggest failure, MS-Bob. Microsoft Bob was a program that sat on top of Windows and introduced a new metaphor for computing. Rather than a desktop with files, programs, and windows, Bob used a house with rooms and different objects that acted as programs. So if you wanted to set the time, you'd click on the clock in the room. Alongside the new graphics were little characters like Rover the dog that would sit in the bottom corner of your screen to walk you through whatever task you were doing, talking personally to the user and giving specific responses to keep the conversation moving forward. The program flopped big time. Between its $99 price tag, higher-end hardware requirements putting it out of the reach of most beginner computer users, and the fact that critics and the more technically inclined found it overly patronizing, Bob never really found its niche, selling about 50,000 copies altogether. For comparison, that same year, Windows 95 sold nearly 3 million copies in its first month alone. Still, the characters of MS-Bob didn't hold a candle to Microsoft's actual vision for a social interface. In fact, at the same CES that Bill Gates had announced Bob, he had also participated in a much more advanced demonstration of what these characters could become. It included live 3D animated characters like Peedy the Parrot, pre-recorded speech, and most importantly, speech recognition, allowing for a conversational interface. Granted, it only worked in the narrow area of music selection, and all the cartoony animations really just slowed down the whole process, but even so, the fact that it required essentially no prior training to use demonstrated the power of the social interface.
How about a shout?
No, something else.
Would you like to hear everybody wants to rule the world?
Sure.
And so, even though MS-Bob failed and the project was discontinued, the technology behind its little cartoon characters, Microsoft Actor, remained in use. Less than 2 years later, Microsoft released Office 97, the long-awaited addition to their productivity software line, with a new little feature enabled by default, the Office Assistant. Sitting in a little window of its own, the Office Assistant was Microsoft's second attempt at incorporating MS Actor characters into a product. Rather than having to read a manual or browse the software's help topics, the assistant would offer help options, allow the user to ask questions, and even automatically detect when it could offer guided assistance, like a software wizard. Giving us the infamous line, "It looks like you're writing a letter. Would you like help?" That line, it seems, is always pinned on Clippy, but actually Microsoft Office had several characters to choose from, even a few humanoid characters based on historical figures like Albert Einstein and Shakespeare, just in case you needed a digital version of the Bard to tell you your letter stings. Clippy, or Clip-It, officially, just happened to be the default character, the result of focus groups finding him to be the most trustful and engaging and endearing character, out of about 250 to choose from. Clippy's creator, Kevin Atterbury, a children's book illustrator, had submitted 15 characters alone. Clippy just happened to be the unlucky favorite of the bunch. It didn't help that Office Assistant was enabled by default. Sure, novice computer users would probably appreciate any kind of additional user-friendliness, but Microsoft seemed adamant that the Assistant was something everyone was going to use. Even the experienced Office users who found the little cartoon characters patronizing. But just like with Bob before, the negative reception wasn't enough to stop Microsoft's development of the social interface. And with the backing of Tandy Trower, Microsoft Actor was given an update into what's now called Microsoft Agent. Microsoft Agent added speech capabilities through the Microsoft Speech API, but more importantly, it finally allowed third-party developers to create and use these agent characters in their own programs and websites. And with this software finally being available to the public, it saw some more widespread use, like websites full of custom characters for free download, some further down the uncanny valley than others, and even programs that used it to... You know what, everyone knows I'm just gonna say Bonzi Buddy, might as well just quit trying it out. As for Clippy though, it wouldn't be long for Microsoft to turn on him. MS Office 2000 gave him and the other Office Assistants a makeover to better match the pre-rendered graphics of the MS Agent characters, but by the time Office XP rolled around, Clippy's time was up. The Office Assistant was disabled by default in the new version of MS Office, and rather than just having that be a silent little tweak to the program, Microsoft made it a selling point. Not even 4 years after creating him, Microsoft jumped on the Clippy hate bandwagon, complete with a flash game where you tried to remove Clippy from your computer, and a 3-part animated series showing Clippy getting fired. I'd also like to point out that it's official Microsoft canon that Clippy has the voice of Gilbert Gottfried.
Oh, really? Office XP, eh? Well, we'll just see about this. Hey, you! It looks like you're writing a letter! Would you like— Beat it!
The real irony is, as much as Microsoft was trying to let it be known that Office XP finally got rid of that annoying paperclip, Office Assistant was still there. Sure, now you had to enable it manually, but it wouldn't be until Office 2007, 6 years later, that Clippy would finally be gone for good from the program. And even after that, the technology that powered Clippy, Microsoft Agent, would remain in the Windows operating system until Windows 7 in 2009. When anyone daring enough to mess around with it for whatever reasons there might be, would need to install it manually from the Microsoft website, essentially spelling the end of Clippy. That was nearly 10 years ago. 17 if you count the initial removal of Clippy in Office XP. There are people going into high school right now who may have grown up never seeing Clippy on their computer. So why is it that now, over 20 years after its introduction, people are still making fun of Clippy through YouTube videos, TV, and things better left unmentioned? Well, honestly, what else but nostalgia? Not necessarily some Stockholm Syndrome-like attachment to the unliked software, but a shared experience between tons of people who happened to be alive during a 4-year window. Flops like the Newton fade out in part because they were unpopular to begin with, but Clippy, being included in every copy of MS Office, was essentially advertised to everyone who used it. It's like 404's error reports and the broken image icon. We don't remember them because we found them endearing, but because they were part of the experience. Clippy's instantly recognizable design and trademark line do nothing but help him to be memorable in this way. There's plenty of debate over just where exactly Clippy went wrong. Atterbury, his creator, believed that it was how Clippy acted. Since Clippy never learned from the user to become personalized in any way and would continually offer the same help over and over again, he was impersonal, making him difficult for users to bond with. In my experience with Clippy though, I'd have to say that it's because Clippy really isn't all that helpful. He could offer a few options to ask questions, but anything past those pre-planned responses, and all it offered was a search tool for the help topics, not guided assistance. Looking at ClippyJS, an online implementation of these characters, there are plenty of features for them that went unused. Things like moving around the screen and pointing at on-screen elements. It looked like Microsoft intended MS agents to interact with the computer directly in front of the user, but all of this was left out of the Office Assistants. Heck, you could argue that Bonzi Buddy, literal malware, was a better implementation of Microsoft's social interface than Clippy, just because Bonzi Buddy actually attempted to interact with your computer with you. I'd go as far to say that most people who hate Clippy nowadays just like him ironically. Even Microsoft seems less keen on making fun of him now, including him as an Easter egg in the Microsoft Office theme School Supplies, making him the main character of the game Ribbon Hero 2, and even giving Cortana a few things to say about him. In fact, one could even say that Cortana, an assistant based on natural language requests, is Microsoft finally achieving the dream of their software agent characters from years ago. 20 years later, Cortana is just Clippy done right.
Hi, Bob. It's Bob. Welcome to the future.
Clippy!
Hi, Bob. You look like you want to scream. Would you like me to help you?
Okay, Doc, take me back, please. I'll change my keynote.
I thought this would do the trick.